This is the Deepcool Matrexx 55 ATX tempered glass case, which can be had for 69 Aussie dollars or just 40 US. This case looks great from the outside, but is it actually practical and functional? Let's find out. Let's start off the tour with the front panel, which consists of 3/4 of it being a 4mm thick black tinted tempered glass panel with a diffused RGB LED strip running the length of the panel, separating the other quarter of it, which is a matte black plastic piece. The RGB strip can either be powered by a 12V RGB connector to your motherboard or a 5V Molex connector that will limit its functionality to the preset modes assigned to the case. The diffusion of lighting along this strip is slightly uneven, with the ends barely showing any colour and the middle shining the strongest. A small plastic Deepcool logo can be found at the bottom of the glass panel. There is no ventilation whatsoever at the front, with Deepcool instead opting for ventilation slits on each side of the panel that offers an inch worth of spacing to allow airflow to enter at a 90-degree angle, which isn't optimal at all, but at least there is some mesh in there to filter dust. Removing the front panel by the hand cutout at the bottom reveals all the front panel connectors are attached to it instead of the case, and there are a lot of them, making it difficult if you want to take the panel completely off for whatever reason. Another thing to note is none of the cables are actually routed to the rear of the case, even though there are routing holes at the top and to the sides. Something else I also found quite odd is the cables are all black until you reach the actual connector portion of some of them, which have an ugly green shrink wrap at the base. There is a rail system down the front of the frame that allows you to install up to 3 120mm fans, with what also looks like support for up to 3 140mm fans, but only 120s are listed as supported on Deepcool's actual product page. There is also a pop-out section up the top here for a 5¼ inch drive, with the inner rear panel also having screw mounting holes for it, but again, Deepcool's website says this case offers zero support for this size drive. I personally would recommend attaching your fans to the inner side of the case instead of between the frame and the front panel to maximise the limited airflow, unless you plan on having a radiator at the front, as there is only 45mm of clearance before you hit the non-removable drive cage. Aesthetics wise, this isn't actually pleasing, as you won't see the complete fan through the front, but it will optimise your limited airflow. Another thing to note is the fan is centered to the frame, not the front tempered glass piece, so it will appear off to the side slightly, looking through the glass, which actually bugs me more than it should. Moving around to the left side panel, we see a full-sized 4mm thick tinted tempered glass panel held on by 4 screws. The panel itself sits on standoffs with rubber over the top, so it will not fall off once the screws are removed, but that doesn't mean I would trust leaving it just sitting there. Due to this mounting system, unless you are wearing gloves, you are guaranteed to leave oily finger marks around each of the screw heads. Another thing I would like to point out with this panel is that it doesn't sit flush against the frame, so there is about a 1mm gap all the way around for potential air and sound leakage. Around the back is the I/O cutout, a 120mm fan mount with height adjustment and radiator support available. 7 PCI slots, with one being a real one, and the rest are one of these cheap one-time use wiggle and snap off variety, with one of these useless adjustable bracket clamps on the right that ended up interfering with my GPU backplate, so I had to remove it. Down the bottom is a non-removable full-sized ATX power supply cutout. Up on top there is room for up to 2 120mm fans or only one 140mm fan, but again, that's according to Deepcool's product page, but I bet I could fit 2 up there. This area is positioned further towards the front of the case so as not to interfere with the motherboard heatsinks. There is also an included magnetic dust filter, which is greatly appreciated for easy cleaning. On top of the front panel is the I/O, which consists of one USB 3.0, 2 USB 2.0s, a mic and headphone jack, reset switch, an LED toggle button that flashes red occasionally, and a power button that lights up blue, which is unfortunate these aren't RGB controllable. The rear side panel is completely flat and held on by 2 non-captive thumb screws, so try not to lose those. Heading underneath is one of those dicky held by metal tabs mesh dust filters for the power supply, and 4 foam padded plastic feet that raise the case plenty to allow fresh airflow to a downward facing power supply. Time to head on inside the case, starting off with the rear first, where honestly there isn't much going on back here other than about an inch worth of spacing for cable management, which is good to see. There are also plenty of cutouts, including a large one for the CPU area with cable tie points dotted in the middle and right hand side, but none present towards the front of the case. Moving to the front, there is a large motherboard tray area that can fit up to ATX motherboards, which is something you don't often see supported in budget cases. There are only 6 standoffs pre-installed, so you'll have to screw the rest in yourself, and none of them are protruded to hold your motherboard in place. On the right hand side on the wall is 2 spots for 2.5 inch hard drives, but strangely the cable cutouts aren't actually large enough for the SATA power to be fed through easily, as it needs to be about a centimetre wider, so these 2 spots are practically useless. Down the bottom is the drive cage that allows for 2 3.5 or 2.5 drives to be attached by screws in the removable sleds, then screwed into the drive cage. These two drives can be easily accessed through the large cutout at the back of the case to add your SATA data and power. I feel Deepcool have missed an opportunity here to have the ability to mount an SSD or another hard drive on top of this cage, but that's just an idea, not a critique. Down the bottom left is where you can mount your power supply, with clearance up to 220mm before hitting the drive cage, so large BC power supplies won't really fit. There is a convenient cutout just in front of the power supply to route your cable somewhat cleanly, and plenty of room above your motherboard for the 8-pin EPS cable. CPU cooler clearance height is 168mm, which will fit most air coolers other than the behemoths. GPU clearance is 380mm, which is plenty of space for even the largest add-in board partner coolers. Unfortunately, there is no power supply shroud, even though some cheaper cases have them, or rubber grommets on any of the cable cutouts, so if you care about your PC's aesthetics, then you may have to spend a bit more time than usual on cable management. Also, if you hadn't noticed yet, this case comes with 0 pre-installed fans, so don't forget to factor in a few fans into your budget if you're going to choose this variant of the case. The Matrexx 55 only comes in one colour, which is black, despite having a white option actually listed on the box. There are a few variants of this case, with one coming with a power supply shroud and 3 RGB fans, and another having just a blue LED strip at the front with no fans or power supply shroud, so be sure to read the case description to work out which one is actually listed. Now that's out of the way, let's talk about size, with the case being 440mm long, 480mm high, and 210mm wide, and weighing in at about 7 kilos. Building inside the case was easy, with its mostly open design and plenty of cutouts for the majority of cables, except for any cables along the bottom of the motherboard such as USB or HD audio, as they had to be routed all the way from the power supply cutout. Luckily, I only had 2 drives, so I was able to stash them away in the hard drive cage and not have to try and use the SSD wall mounts. I wanted to test how restricted the front panel was, so I put my i5 6500 CPU through an Intel burn test and the GTX 980 Ti Strix Edition GPU running Unigine Heaven 4.0 test for 20 minutes, with all fans including the GPU set to 60%. With the front panel on, the CPU reached a maximum of 72 degrees Celsius and the GPU was at 79 degrees Celsius, but with the front panel off, the CPU was only at 67 degrees Celsius and the GPU at 72 degrees Celsius, which proves the panel is restricting airflow. In conclusion, from the outside, the aesthetics of this case are amazing, making it look more premium than the price point suggests, but once you begin to build in it, the cracks begin to show with nearly unusable SSD mounts, no fans or power supply shroud included on this version, and poor airflow, just to name a few. If I'm talking from a pure aesthetic standpoint, this case is amazing, and I can't help admire how nice this build looks with colours matching and beautiful tempered glass on the front and side panel. For everything good about this case, I can find something negative, so I cannot personally recommend this case unless any of these issues I've raised don't bother you or you just want to jump on the tempered glass bandwagon on the cheap. I would suggest, if you are interested in this design, to go for the Add RGB variant, as that has the power supply shroud and 3 RGB fans at the front, so that deals with some of the issues I've raised. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like, and if you really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing for more case reviews and other content in the future. If you have a suggestion, question or criticism, leave a comment. Thank you very much for watching.